All right, well, hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. I have the entire UED First Light team here today to talk about Part 1 and 2 being released later this year. So I'm here with the Oracle, who is going to go ahead and give an intro to the project, the team, and then I'd love to do a roundtable with the group. We have a team here of about, looks like 7 people, so it's going to be awesome.
So yeah, hello everybody. So I'm the Oracle, the project director for UED First Light. The opportunity with the campaign was to provide something as close to Blizzard quality as we could all respectively get it, to close as we can replicate the Blizzard experience. Just give folks another single-player campaign they can really sink their teeth into. A couple of years ago, we released what we refer to as Part 1. That contained 11 missions playable, including a prologue. We're going to talk a little later, I'm sure, about our approach to Part 2, what we're doing to revamp Part 1 based on some feedback we received from the player base. But overall, our goal is to provide, at the end of this road, a 28-mission single-player campaign experience for both veteran players as well as casuals. We're adjusting difficulties to accommodate that. So excited to tell you what we have in store and appreciate everyone listening.
I was really excited to see an update for Part 2 coming out. And then as part of that, one thing I did not expect was it just seems like Part 1 has been completely revamped. And we can hear more about what that means, like what the extent of that is. But that was really surprising to me. I know you've sent me a few things, just kind of getting my input on just one example is like the infantry. There was some feedback in Part 1 where it's like the infantry kind of looked, it was hard to distinguish which was which. And so you had sent me some screenshots and like, here's what we're changing to address that. So I'm really excited to see a lot of the changes sort of in a broader sense. I'm a huge sucker for people who revisit their projects and sort of I don't want to say redo them completely, because obviously there's a huge foundation that's still there, but when you have these really big changes, taking into account all the feedback that you got, it's really awesome. I'm really excited to hear more.
So we'll introduce the team first, if you're good with that, or have them introduce themselves, should I say, what they're doing, what they've done, and then, yeah, we'll dive into anything and everything related to the project itself.
Sounds good.
All right, so in order of appearance in the channel here, Ordinator, we'll start with you.
All right. So hello everyone, you may know me from the Regression project, and currently I'm developing Killsteel, and I was involved in this project because my training is kind of good, and I kind of noticed that it's really my forte of doing those grim, dark terrains, and I think I really went all out with that. Especially on this campaign, like I was just thinking up of every terraining skill I could use in this campaign. And I hope folks will notice and the terrain will help them immerse in this project. I really hope. So that's pretty much all.
Al, you're next.
Hey guys, am I audible?
Yes.
Excellent. Hey everyone, so this is Solvais. I have worked in a few low-key projects like Axim Mod for Total Biscuit. I'm also known for working on the Anti Chronicles remaster and episode 3. I have also worked on this project on part 1, and currently there is another project some people may have heard about, StarCraft Evolution Complete, remake of Brood War data and content into StarCraft 2. I have been on the modding since the early beta of the game, and well, it's nice to be here.
Inoki, you're up.
Yeah, I'm Inoki. I've been in the scene for a little while. My first mod was Legacy of the Tal'Darim, which Grant showcased a while back. But I've recently been involved in quite a few projects, namely Memes of Liberty, Twitch Trolls Grant Legacy of the Void, and I'm also on the Evolution Complete team. I'm more of a jack of all trades kind of guy, but I tend to do more of the data and triggers work.
Hey there. I'm Kat. I've been working as on the original team, working on part one, doing the maps. I was responsible for designing a few of the maps, the big ones, gatekeepers. I did also clean and sweep, which was a pretty large undertaking in terms of the map and the AI. I also did a lot of the work on the backend for the mod, so handling the game progression, the game saves. We were responsible for a lot of innovations in terms of new things added to the editor in a way. The autosaves were a particularly fun thing to work with when we made it. And yeah, I'm also the project director for Evolution Complete, and some of that work is coming in part two for this as well.
Go.
Hey everyone, I'm Subsorian, and unlike these people with actual creative talent, I just complain about the lore. I run the StarCraft wiki. I've shown up on Jay Verino's channel enough. You probably have seen me before, but yeah, I'm helping keep the project consistent with the lore of StarCraft, and I'm also helping write a bunch of new codexes for the project. So yeah.
And by helping, what he really means is he's writing a bunch of new codexes for the project. He's come up with them alpha to omega.
I'll never forgive Grant for making me go against Subsaurian in StarCraft Jeopardy.
Wasn't much of a fight there.
Right.
Synergy, sir.
Yeah, I'm Synergy. I'm a full-time StarCraft 2 mapmaker. My most well-known projects are the Racial campaigns and Azeroth Reborn, Warcraft 3 remake in StarCraft 2. And I was brought into UED First Light for part 2 as a level designer, meaning I mostly get a script and I come up with a map to support that and do all the triggers, cinematics, and all the gameplay related stuff for the project.
Thanks for all the intros. And I have to say, Oracle, you've really put together just a literal dream team of modders here. A lot of you I'm at least familiar with. Many of you I've spoken to before, but like this is incredible. Like with your powers combined, this is excellent. After what we've seen in part one, I'm really excited for part two. But all of your individual projects too have been incredibly impressive, incredibly fun. So it's wild to see everybody come together. I also know in the past, in my experience, that putting together a team and keeping a team together, I'm sure a lot of you have been in experience with this, is very challenging in a hobbyist community. So I give everyone props for staying together and making this happen. It's really impressive. So thank you. Oracle, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about part one in particular, not so much the updates that you're making right now, but I guess those in response to the release of the original part. So do you want to start there?
Absolutely. So in my intro, I mentioned one of the things we wanted to do was provide an authentic Blizzard-esque experience with this single-player campaign. Originally, it was going to be targeted for what we call the modding mapmaker community. It was never really expected to move outside that niche cohort, but it did catch on with what we would call the more general player base, and this is where a lot of that feedback came from. And this is where they told us, this isn't like the Blizzard campaigns I know. And there were a few reasons they articulated on a general basis as to why that was. Number one, some of the missions were too long. Number two, there wasn't enough base building in those missions. And then number three, the players did not have an ability to really impact the flow of gameplay in a map, or what I would term as player agency. This is the feedback that was adverse. Now, there's plenty of very positive feedback. The voice acting. We have more than 70 professional voice actors working on the campaign with us, for example. The graphical additions with the new faction, which is the United Powers League, the predecessor to the UED, because the campaign takes place 250 years before the events of StarCraft. So there was a lot of great feedback there, but I'm going to focus on the feedback that necessitated change. So once I said, how dare these folks say these things? Once I got over myself and I looked at it more closely, I realized, okay, there actually is some meat here on this bone. Now, humans are generally very good at ascribing fault to things they do not prefer, that they don't like. Humans are generally terrible at solutioning those things. And so there were as many ideas on how to fix these issues as there were comments on these issues. The fixes, however, we found to be much more in line, we feel, with Blizzard's approach. So in terms of the length of the mission, we determined it was not really the length of the mission that was causing the issue. It was the gameplay without meaning, without seeming purpose. Players would go from task to task, but it wouldn't change anything. Nothing in the gameplay changed. There was no additional dialogue. There was no story beat. It was just moving from do this to do that, and it became, for lack of a better term, a slog. So we've now fixed that by ensuring that any task a player undertakes in part 1 has some type of benefit at the end. Maybe destroying a enemy base reduces the frequency of attacks on the player's base. Or destroying an enemy base will get you an additional story beat on how the characters react to that situation and what the next steps are. Things that were absent in part 1 during those events will be there for part 2. So as far as the length of the mission, that takes care of that, we feel. And also a little bit of player agency. Now, in terms of the non-base building, that was the easiest fix. We just inserted base building every possible place we could without compromising the flow of gameplay itself. So instead of having the first, 5 missions be almost entirely micro, now the first couple missions are still micro. Get players familiar with the new units, new heroes, the new gameplay style, because there are stylistic nuances to UED First Light, and then immediately get the player into gameplay on mission 3, base building, excuse me. So that will allow the player to gradually ramp up versus being dropped into a gameplay scenario where they don't know what's going on. So Jay, in fact, I think you mentioned this in your playthrough, which is a lot of the base building fundamentals were introduced when the player's base was under heavy attack. And you mentioned that it was difficult for you as a player to really understand how to interact with those units in that setting because you had not had time to get to know them all individually. And so what we've done is we've stepped it up. For example, the first base building introduces you to a couple infantry units. Then the next mission, a couple more infantry units, and then a tank. So gradually building the player's familiarity with those units. Now, one thing that we didn't like is that on a typical Blizzard map, when a new unit's introduced, you need to ball up that unit in order to beat the map. That's sort of the tactic there. So if it's the lava map, then you ball up a bunch of Reapers who can do the cliff jumping. And we didn't want that. We wanted players to still be able to use whatever units they wanted on the map, even as new ones were being introduced, and be able to experiment with different ways to tackle the challenges of the gameplay and hit the objective. So there won't be one prescribed method to beat the maps or attain the achievements. Players will have the choice on how they want to do that, but as the maps progress, they will have more tools from which to choose out of the kit in order to accomplish that. So those are the major changes we made to part 1. The other piece is more story-driven. There were some characters players felt didn't really earn the skill that they had in fending off what is the portrayed Zerg invasion of Earth. And they felt that the character just, they are able to do it just because we as the game authors say so, and that's really not fair to the character. So there were a lot of story reveals in part 2 that have been pulled forward to part 1 to ensure that players understand why the character is actually competent in executing this very combat-oriented role, despite the fact that their profession may not otherwise lend itself to it. And we think that that'll add some more authenticity to the experience and be less likely to break immersion. So Jay, for part 1, those are the major changes we're making. As a result of it, there's actually more missions in part 1 now than there were before, including a couple brand spanking new ones that didn't exist in any way, shape, or form.
I think that's a pretty big change too, because there's a lot of times I'll be playing something and I'm like, oh, this is going pretty long. Like it's not uncommon just in general. And then I have to stop and remember, like, okay, from a map maker's perspective, you have to create an entirely new map versus taking something where you already have all of these fundamentals built and then you can add a little bit to kind of extend the length of that map. And as the player, I'm like, this is too long. It's really easy to kind of give that feedback, but the solution is, just make it 2 maps, which is a lot more work, I think, than a lot of people might give it credit for when it seems like the simplest thing. So the fact that you all did that, that actually is substantial to me. Like, I recognize how much effort it takes to build something from the ground up, just so that you can take something that's becoming too long and splitting it out. And I think like the length of the missions is something for me that has become more of a recent thing, honestly. I think like 5 years ago, if I was playing a map and it was 90 plus minutes, I would have been like, fine, this is fine. I wouldn't have even really thought about it. But now I'm like, if someone gives me a mission that's like a cool 35 minutes, I stop recording and I'm like, what a dream. This was great. But I know it's not that simple, especially when you go in with a vision. There can be scope creep. You just really want to get everything in. You have all these voice lines. You've got all this music. You've got all these cool new units. You want to make sure that they get in there. So I understand that poses a major challenge. And then I guess that leads into my question kind of for the whole team, which is being such a large team and being that each map has a very specific vision where you have very specific goals, given this different feedback, is how does the team interact with, like, you have however many maps per campaign? Like, is it that one person kind of takes the lead on one map, or is it Oracle, you actually kind of have the framework and then everybody adds a little piece to it and it somehow manages to come out still fitting that framework after going through a team of 7 people?
I'm going to let the team here speak to the different components of it, but it's more of a conveyor belt. So different folks will contribute their area of expertise. And then really my job, or in the case of part 2, with a decent number of the map synergy's job, is to take those pieces and blend them into the map itself. So as an example, when we initially start a map, it looks like just blocks of terrain, right? Because Ordinator hasn't had his chance to go in there and make it look all pretty. So it looks absolutely terrible when you're going through it, but you're just testing gameplay. The integration of voice lines, how the units interact with each other, the challenge level, those types of things. And once that's finalized, then Ordinator comes in and actually pretties up the map, which makes a huge difference in the immersion. But all the components are done separate. Now, we have the team here who are working on it from within the community, but there's several team members who are not part of the community that do artwork for the new units. Of course, you have all the voice actors that we've got, the folks who are doing the new loading screens. All those folks aren't part of this session, but all those pieces still have to be combined together to create a gaming experience. And so, Synergy, I'll start with you on that because you were working on the part 2 maps. Why don't you describe a little bit about what you went through as you were doing some of those, and what you may have seen the challenges to be?
Yeah, so a short intro. I was not as busy as I usually am with my own project, so Al told me that Oracle was looking for new people to work on triggers for part 2. So that's mainly why I joined. But then Oracle told me that they were kind of changing design direction, and the part 2 maps could look more like StarCraft 2 campaign maps, which I think I'm uniquely qualified to work on, so that I was very happy about that. But as for the project of the process of making a new map, I basically get a script from Oracle, which describes the situation, who are the characters, what are they doing, and where and why. And usually also a description of the mission objective, what you're supposed to do to move the story forward and clear the mission. And based on that, I make a rough layout of the map, basically cliffs and ramps and the paths that the units can take. Very, very rough stuff. I don't have any skill at making good terrain, but I just make it functional. Then based on that, I just work on the cinematics, the gameplay. It's a ton of trial and error. I just work on it as much as I can until I feel, okay, this is good enough for an initial revision. Then I send over to Oracle, he gives some feedback, I work on the map some more, and then we repeat that process 3 or 4 times until we consider that the mission is good enough for now, and I move on to something else, and the map gets handed over to Ordinator generally so he can make the terrain look good.
And during that design of the gameplay, you'll often run into data elements that weren't even part of the script. A boss encounter, for example. And there'll be certain flow of gameplay that might be nice. This is when Synergy would tap Inoki on the shoulder and say, "Hey, I need this boss unit to do these things." Things that have never appeared in any campaign map to our knowledge. And Inoki says, "Sure, I'll figure that out." So Inoki, kind of talk about how you just come up with data out of thin air that previously never existed.
Absolutely, yeah. I heard that Synergy was doing this, and I was like, hey, I should also do this. And so I talked to Oracle, and of course, it worked out. But I essentially handle all of the backend data, not necessarily the bank states and from mission to mission, but all of the units' data. So the weapons, the abilities, all of that. And I've also been doing map-specific units. Like, for example, there's a couple missions that have a single specific unit that then wanted to have a bigger part because I made it so well. I tend to do models as well when needed. But I've also been handling most of the bosses and hero data that didn't exist before I joined. Because I'm kind of recent, beginning of this year, really. But yeah, basically whenever things are needed for on a specific map and handling things on the bigger side.
And then as the map progresses, Subsorian will lay eyes on it, kind of just play through to see how it flows, and he'll say, "Hey, what is this?" And he'll talk about a unit that he sees or a place that's depicted. He says, "This is a great spot for a codex." And boom, now you have all these additional story elements for players that want to dig really deep into the lore of the campaign that he's finding opportunities to do. Now, Subsorian's primary charter is to make sure that the story, the script, the events, everything does not conflict with Blizzard canon. Now, the first thing players who are not familiar with the campaign are going to say is, "Well, Oracle, you said just a minute ago the Zerg invaded Earth. That never happened because it's not in the original StarCraft manual. It was never referenced in StarCraft 2. Subsorian has taken great pains to ensure that that does align. If you want to know how, you will not find out on this discussion, but you will find out when you play the campaign. That said, he is making sure that those guardrails are rigidly enforced, and that if we even step an inch outside them, we get electrocuted with 10,000 volts. So, Subsorian, you want to talk a little bit about your approach to managing that aspect of things?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of came in with a very critical eye to make sure that everything aligns with the lore we have on the UPL, because the UPL was set up in the StarCraft 1 manual. There's actually a pretty detailed stretch from the 21st century to what the super carrier is leaving. So I wanted to make sure that it could realistically fit in. The conceit being the Brood War manual mentions that we never encountered aliens till now, and as the beginning says, that's propaganda. Obviously we encounter them in UED First Light, but so we wanted to be able to tell the story, but still in the rigid confines of what Blizzard has said about the story and setting. And when we run into any issues, I usually try to fit in a codex. I've also really tried to a big focus of mine has also been trying to kind of expand the universe a lot into the gap. So in the manual, the 22nd century is considered a huge period of chaos that the UED evolves out of. There's a huge anti-transhumanist uprising. So I've really tried to weave those a little more into the lore as we see in the UED First Light, which is relatively a generation after the UED's founding. The super carriers have left. I'm sorry, UPL's founding. And yeah, so that's kind of my focus. Is I'm really trying to make sure, especially with part 1, that while we don't have a ton of the UPL, that we keep the narrow guardrails up. That if Blizzard came in and said, "Hey, we want to make this canon," you could realistically slot that in and not with minimal changes.
I have a more specific question too on the lore part, because I know that this was a big thing where I think just depending on the type of person, there's different thresholds, right, on where there's a suspension of disbelief, and it sounds like you all are making it so that you will be accommodating for people where that threshold is incredibly low, such that they can't find something, especially if Soren, you're the one who's kind of managing this part, like you are the system of record, as it were, for this. So there's really nothing someone could pick out and be like, well, hang on. I think like a surface level thing is okay. The Roach unit can't be there anymore, and I know that that's been replaced. I'm not sure if you've publicly shown what it is. I don't really know offhand, but I know like that's probably something that just, again, kind of one of the most surface level things is like that unit doesn't exist, so it needs to be replaced. Something that the impression that I got, at least with the original, was kind of the tagline I think Oracle you used in like the original trailer was like, "Don't believe the propaganda," which I felt was kind of supposed to be a, hey, there's this stuff in the manual, and maybe the manual itself was written by the UED post UPL to kind of erase this part of history that they don't like, which in some ways tracked against the original legacy of the Confederation, which I don't know how much you'd even want to talk about that, because I know this is not the same thing, but clearly there's a deep connection there. And I guess if one or both of you could talk a little bit about like this, is that still kind of an idea where it's more about the UED controlling the narrative than it is something that's stringently accommodating the existing canon?
So I can speak to that's. I'll let Oracle kind of go in on the conforming to the existing canon. But you mentioned, we're definitely changing the Roach. We've shown it in the trailer. We're trying to make something that fits a little more to a Zerg invasion of Earth. Ideally, of course, if we were completely 100% adherent to canon, the Zerg from 250 years ago would be like a completely different faction. But I don't think we can't do that. I don't think anyone really particularly would come in and really want that because it'd be so different. But so we're really working to get the tiny details right, but also something you'd recognize as the Swarm. And Oracle, if you want to speak to the second part of that.
Yeah, so we thought that, and actually it's one of our folks on the team who couldn't be here today, Kyrie. She's never told me if I pronounced that right. But she had come up with an idea for having the Zerg assimilate a creature on Earth and have that be the basis for the new unit, and that's exactly what we did. So it is a fundamentally different unit than any that exists today within the Swarm, including subsequent releases by Blizzard with the expansions. It's a cliff jumping unit. It has both a range and a melee attack. It fulfills the role of having an armored unit, but it is more lightly armored because it focuses so heavily on mobility. So there are pictures of it in the development diary on the Discord channel. If anyone wants to go take a look at it, it is right there for folks to see, including both a portrait view and a unit view. But props to everyone for making that. By Kat, who has not yet had a chance to speak yet, it does all of our what I call model massaging. He takes the models that are designed from the external folks working on the project, incorporates them into the engine, smooths them out, makes sure that the graphics don't terribly deviate from what's there today, if not at all. And then from there, Inoki would take it over and do the data for it. And that's exactly what happened here. Again, that conveyor belt, right? So Kat made sure that the unit looked good in the engine, looked similar to other Zerg. Inoki gave the data behind it so that it would function properly when engaging the player. So that unit, I mean, it's real. Now, why did we have the Roach in the beginning? That's simple, budget. It's just it wasn't where we wanted to spend our dollars. So we left it in. Same thing with the Ground Queens, which are also gone, by the way, for anyone who's going to ask that question. So the Ground Queens are history. The Roach is history. And then as far as the canon piece, we can't say what "don't believe the propaganda" really means without spoiling the tail end of part 2. But what we can do is point you to the beginning of the trailer that was recently released, as there's some clues from the Protoss who's narrating that, Prelate Zothran, and you'll even see a picture of him in an expanded view of the UED Council meeting that was initially depicted in StarCraft Brood War. So you'll actually see the whole panoramic view of that image, not just the cropped image that was shown for propaganda purposes in Brood War. So that'll just give you an idea, but we can't answer that question directly.
Gotcha. Well, and this kind of leads into the next topic, which could be for several of you, just from a design standpoint, but also a lore standpoint, is this, it's a very dark story. Again, going back to even your original project back in the original StarCraft Oracle, it's very, very, very dark, which I know, Ordinator, you talked about kind of like grim, dark terraining. And I was kind of curious, like, what does that mean? Like, from a design perspective, when you're beautifying a map, what are some of the elements that you add that kind of give that, besides like, oh, it's just dark, like just make the lighting dark. But yeah, I'd love to hear just kind of from the different perspectives of the map designs. Like, what does that mean, and why is that important to the project for all of you?
Well, to start, yeah, it's mostly the lighting. Just take off the color, but yeah, it's not as simple as that. Initially, I was just spamming rubble doodads and whatnot, but this campaign actually has quite a bunch of custom doodads that I really kind of forgot to use at the start. But as I kind of warmed up to them, I really just went all out. Like, this Condor crashed right here, this Overlord dropped here, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of rubble. Inoki is also been supplying me with some of the variants of the doodads.
Indeed.
So basically, it's just to tell a story that, yeah, there's been an invasion, there's been some fighting, there's corpses, blood everywhere. It's kind of about that.
I will say, Ordinator is not giving themselves as much credit as they should. The environments look spectacular. It like there's a StarCraft 2 Mapster Discord, and there's a channel in there with training, and people will show off works that they've made in the editor, and it's like a single screenshot looks so good, but it's every single part of the map. It's crazy.
Free promotion, thank you.
Yeah, he's definitely underselling. The work that he's been doing throughout the entirety of part 1, a room that you would before see as just a square with a couple pipes thrown in there, now looks like a completely lived-in place. There's a lot of density even to the terrain.
Yeah, I've been
When-
trying to bring in realism to the maps. I had to look at real pictures of roads. That's kind of hard to take in.
So I had played Ordinator's campaign, or a piece of it called Regression. This is where I first heard of him. So I played through Regression, and I look at it, and somehow he took the StarCraft 2 editor, an engine that's been abandoned effectively by Blizzard Entertainment since 2016, and he made those environments look as if it's a next-gen game. That's something that you might see released today. And I'm thinking, how the heck did this guy do that? And so I reached out to him and said, I want you to do whatever you did there, I want you to do here. And he's done it. So he is able to work some type of dark magic on the engine that allows you to take what are just doodads and terrain and make them look alive. It's the best way I can describe it. As an example, there is a mission in part 2, which is for pieces of it, for a micro portion. It's broken up. There's part macro, part micro. In the micro portion, you go from a series of rooms. Well, the rooms are naturally rectangular. And looking at it before the terraining, it looks terrible, right? It looks like a bunch of blocky rooms just tied together with doorways. And the team commented on this. It just doesn't look that great. But then Ordinator came in, and now it looks like a truly mystical place that you would fully expect to see if you were in that environment in reality. And he just has that gift. So yeah, he really brings that immersive component to the campaign that previously did not exist. Now, a lot of the training before was done by yours truly on the maps I was working on. It didn't get any adverse feedback. It didn't get any good feedback either. So what he's done, I suspect, is very much going to get that good feedback because it just looks so realistic. especially considering the limitations of the engine. He just burst right past those.
I'm really excited to see them. I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, it's so difficult, kind of to your point earlier when you said people know when something makes them feel bad, but it's challenging for them to explain why and also give a realistic solution to it. And I think kind of in that general idea, along that idea route, is so much of this in terms of a player perspective is just vibes. Like, truly, it's just vibes. And when I say just vibes, I mean, again, when you're the player playing it, and so much of these small details that, again, you assemble like a crack team of incredibly talented individuals who all have to be so good at the top of their game to meet that, quote, just vibes threshold for so many people. But terrain, music, all the models, the way that information is delivered, at what times, so much of this just all comes together to make something so much greater than the sum of its parts. And I think that terraining in particular is something that probably stops so many people from entering into the space of map making in general. I've always felt like I've dabbled, and terraining is one of those things where I don't have the creative eye for it. It's definitely just something that requires so much talent and experience, and probably something innate as well that I just don't have. Like, in terms of triggering, it's not easy, but I feel like for me, it's something that I could learn. Like, I'm not good at it, and it requires a lot of talent, but it's something where I'm like, okay, I think with enough time and enough passion to sink into this, I could get better at it. With terraining, I just feel totally lost. Like, I just look at a blank canvas and don't know even where to start. So I don't know. I'm just musing about nothing here, but just pointing out how important it is to recognize people's strengths in these different areas, whether it be data editing, terraining, triggering, the ability to write a script with effective dialogue, and then you have the voice actors, and then you have someone who's composing the music. Like, putting all this together is really a feat that I have not seen across any of the modding of any of the games that I've played. So hats off to the team. It's really awesome.
I do want to say that terraining is one of those things that is it's expected pretty much whenever you play a campaign, but there's so much effort and art behind it. And I can't speak to it because I'm not I'm not a training person, but it's yeah.
Yeah, you talked about the music too, Jay. Yeah, so the music, just like with part one, is a combination of music directly composed for the campaign, which is done by Zach Thiessen. And his work is up on Spotify for anyone who's been listening to music outside of UED First Light. And then also a combination of royalty-free tracks that were purchased and licensed for this use. Music is one of those things that just sets a mood.
Yes.
And I can prove that to anyone. So if you were to take the boxing movie Rocky, right, and you have the Eye of the Tiger music going when he's training and during that montage, and you were to replace that with some silly comedy music, that whole scene will be completely destroyed because of the presence of that inappropriately mood set music. So the music itself is almost a character within the campaign. It governs the emotional resonance that the player is going to have when they engage with the content. Now, yes, the content itself has to be engaging. I'm not saying it doesn't, but the music is going to create the emotional beats for that. So if it's a dark and brooding melody or an underscore, that'll be something that's more serious than, say, a bombastic or an adventurous tone. That might be for when the player has some hopeful victories. And that music piece, yeah, with the royalty-free tracks, you have to listen to, I kid you not, thousands to find one that is appropriately suitable for the mood you're looking to convey and does not conflict rhythmically with the stuff that Zach Thiessen has done. So you have those two elements to combine. But no, we're definitely happy with the music output. I also posted alongside the trailer on YouTube a picture of the orchestra recording one of Zach's pieces for anyone who'd like to see that in action. European orchestra, they do this regularly for movie scores too. That's what they do, is they orchestrate this stuff as the composers write it, and they were kind enough to do it for us as well.
Yeah, I had watched that. I'll put that on the background for this part too, just so people can see. That was one thing I wanted to ask about is that just something where you just kind of reach out, you fill out a form, and they send you a rate, and then was that something that Zach handled, or did you reach out for that? Like, what was it like working with the Budapest Scoring Orchestra?
Yeah, I find that if there's folks who are experts at what they do, like everyone here, is my job is really more just to tell them what the objective is and then stay out of their way and let them figure out how to do it best they can, because they know a lot more about it than I'm ever going to learn. So in the case of music, Zach, yeah, absolutely handled that. He's the one who suggested it. He said, hey, I've got these contacts at the orchestra. I think it'll add some real zest to the music if we were to go ahead and combine that in versus me just having to do the instrumentation through his software. And the rate was reasonable. So I said, sure, go ahead and do it. And so there's one of them he actually composed or conducted himself. One of them he had the conductor who comes with the package, if you will, but the composers have the option to conduct the orchestra themselves if they prefer. And just as with part one, you don't have a whole lot of brass making its appearance because brass does tend to lend more to the bombastic or upbeat or hopeful tones when it comes to depicting a mood. So you have more string sections, woodwinds, and synthetics.
Kind of back to the grimdark mood. One piece of feedback that I personally could not disagree with more about part one, as I saw some comments of people saying, the end is miserable and I hate it. Why does it have to end that way? Why does everything have to be so miserable? And I loved it. I thought the end, like, it was chilling. It evoked that feeling. And I think maybe some people can't stop and remove themselves to think like this was trying to evoke a feeling of misery, and it succeeded really, really well at that, and we should appreciate that. What's your general feeling on that feedback?
I think the term that I saw was misery porn, and I said, okay, well, yes, it is. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. Now, a person may come back, is it supposed to make you feel bad? I said, no, it's not supposed to make a person feel bad. It is supposed to convey, though, a sense of dread and hopelessness at that point of the story. So in the original Legacy of the Confederation, there was a similar mission where you're trying to send out a message, and the message actually gets out before the base is overrun. It's a perfectly valid story beat. It ends on a more hopeful tone. Maybe that message is going to be heard by, say, the Protoss, and they're going to come help. But it wasn't right for this campaign. This campaign, that actually, what happened is exactly what should have happened to ensure the story was true to itself. Now, I will also say that everything that happens in the story ultimately lends itself to what happens in part two. So there's nothing there that just occurs and you never hear about it again. Even the ending is referenced back in part two and actually contributes to some of the outcomes in part two as things start turning around. So there's a statement that the night is darkest before the dawn. That's sort of where you are right at the end of part one, is that darkest point of the night. But things from there can only get better. And so whereas part one had more of a hopeless tone, part two has more of a hopeful tone. I think part of the issue is players couldn't immediately jump right into part two and see how it all resolved itself. They're just left hanging there with this miserable ending, not knowing if part two is even going to be made. Well, part two is going to be made, and all of that will resolve. And of course, Subsorian's right here, right? He's got the leash on all things lore. The UED exists. Earth does come back from this. Earth does go to Caprulu with an expeditionary force. All of that still happens. So it has to happen somehow. So just because it appears to be the end of times, you could say the end of the world is just the beginning.
Yeah, I saw a lot of feedback. What about the UED? And this project is named UED First Light. I promise we did not forget about the UED. But also, so I think this is another case to add to it of fans giving feedback without knowing the resolution, where they think, oh, this ending is miserable. I felt hopeless. Misery porn as mentioned, but also I think part of that is something we were fixing in part one, which is your actions having more of a tangible impact on the maps, your objectives, feeling like you've accomplished something a little more than I did this thing and nothing. It didn't matter. Nothing I did mattered. So I hoped that with even just in isolation with the changes to part one, you'll still have that hopeless, like, oh, there's nothing we can do to stop the roaches feeling, but you'll get a little less of that, oh, nothing I did matters. This was pointless.
That's a really important distinction. I'm glad you brought that up because I hadn't thought about that because there's so much of it of like, there's a gamified element, which is like, these maps are hard, and I feel a sense of reward when I complete them, and then later on, there's a narrative beat that basically nullifies all of it. And I think being able to separate that out and make the player feel that sense of accomplishment from a gamified perspective, but still be able to convey that sense of hopelessness. And again, it's very much a personal feeling as well. Like, I have always really enjoyed those types of stories where it's kind of like there's an inevitability that you feel like you were able to fight against, and then there's a moment of realization that it didn't matter. And I've always found that moment to be revelatory and really kind of a fun thing to fall upon and realize at that moment. And clearly some people don't like it. But if you can separate it from the gaming element versus like the gameplay element versus the narrative element, that definitely seems like that'll have a much different feel to every player. I'm hopeful for, because I've always really liked the kind of that miserable outcome, right? When you experience true misery in life, it's a lot different than something that's controlled and given to you through media. You can appreciate it when it's intended to be given to you through something that's fake.
Tragedies are fun stories.
Right. Did any of you expect Carr to be as popular as he was? Will we see him more in part 2?
So Carr has had a major update, actually. Carr now has not a new model. I mean, it still looks like Carr, but there's an entirely new voice actor behind Carr for several missions. So, I'm not spoiling anything, right? So you have the Officer Myra Davis. A lot of things previously she was sort of doing by herself, and it became a little bit overdone given the length of some of the tasks that she had to undertake with the weapon set she had. Even if you could switch between long, ground to air weapon, which is her assault rifle, or you could switch to her shotgun, which is spreads on the ground. Grenades, there's only so much that can take it. So she has been buddied up with a Carr unit on the mission she's on, just about all of them actually. And then that Carr unit has an entirely new voice actor. But the original Carr, I think one of the reasons Carr was popular is because it was the only character that threaded through all the missions.
Yeah.
So it's a character people could get to know. Most of the others having met with premature demises. So part of it, the appeal there is it's just a character that endured through the length of the story. It does not surprise me that the character resonated. I mean, it was written to be likable. But I'm curious what the rest of the team thinks.
I joined. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, Inoki.
Okay. I joined after part 1 came out, so I saw a lot of the Carr fervor, I guess you could call it, just along with everyone else. And for me, at least, I think it's this notion of you have this AI that has done nothing wrong, this little robot guy, and everyone's just mean to him. And it's so funny to me, at least. It's good.
Then he's always there, but he's always there for you. I think that's what made him endearing. Yeah.
I also think it's something that's a lot of stuff is very rooted in the world we know, and I think Carr is something that's very distinctly UPL. Like, you would not see that in a modern world, and if you saw that, you go, "Oh, that's the thing from UED First Light." Whereas like a mortar trooper, we want to make it so that it's a little more grounded in the world while still being futuristic. And that's actually a thing I want to praise Ordner on too. Is a big focus in my feedback has been making the UPL feel not just like Earth, but a little more dystopian. They're supposed to be kind of a fascist state, And I think Ordinator has done a fantastic job taking my my nitpicky feedback on a lot of the terrain and helping with and getting that done. So
Awesome. Well, and I saw like the trailer. This isn't really a huge spoiler to say there's going to be a much larger Protoss focus in part 2, which is something teased at even back at the prologue and then not really mentioned again, which is one of those seeds similar to the whole like it ends on a dark note, even though it's called part 1. I assume that was kind of a shift in design focus because suddenly you're in different places and you're designing for an entirely different perspective, different faction, different race. Was that a challenge for the team?
There was a lot of data work for the heroes that happened behind the scenes that we'll see in part 2. But there were, I tried at least to, there things to say without saying things. To make each aspect unique on each hero that we'll see. To give them color schemes and various things. So
one of the things that, as I mentioned before, some of the work that we did for Evolution Completes coming through for part 2, that was the thing. So from an early point, I remember that we were going to use the original, well, not the original, but some of the Brood War units that were added in StarCraft 2 and Legacy of the Void. So instead of that, we decided to just use all the data that we had for the StarCraft Brood War Protoss. So all of the unit stats, all of the abilities are coming through, a bunch of models as well. So yeah, it is a lot of the original Protoss coming back.
yeah, and I'll add also that this is also the Protoss 250 years before StarCraft 1. And a lot of the Protoss arsenal is ancient, even in 2. And of course, we're going to avoid a roach situation. You're not going to see stalkers or immortals show up. But yeah, there is a bit of a challenge of blending in the StarCraft 1 arsenal with some. Yeah, I won't say too much more, but yeah, there's the StarCraft 1 arsenal, which is fantastic from Evolution Complete, and a couple twists along the way too.
I can see maybe a question for Alavis is how this, you had worked on Antioch Remastered as well, and just looking at the trailers for UED First Light Part 2, I definitely see some things that look kind of similar. I guess were you able to use anything from that project to bring the Protoss more to life in this one?
Uh-oh.
We may have lost him. He's on mute. That's fine. I have another question in the chamber. Maybe more of a round table. As someone who works in tech myself, a common experience I have is having an objective and having like a little stretch goal or some part of it where I'm like, oh, this is the easy part. And then I get to it, and for some reason, it takes monumentally more effort and time than I expected. Do any of you have something like that through this project where you're like, oh, I would love it if we could make this just a little different, and then you go to change it and realize it was way, way, way harder than you expected?
Oh, should I say? Okay.
Yeah, Noki, that boss fight, right?
Yeah, okay. So the amount of times that Oracle has come to me and asked for something, and I start doing it, and I'm like, well, this isn't possible. And then he just doesn't respond and wait for me to figure it out, and then I figure it out. There is a ton of data in this mod, well, campaign rather, that pushes what the engine should be doing. And there's a lot of there's quite a few instances of data that came before me that I just don't comprehend how it works. Something that Al does is really complex data that unless you made it, you don't really have a lot of idea how to work with it. So I ended up creating a few abilities from scratch just to work on them because I didn't comprehend how they were made originally in the first place. But there's a few scenes, a few bosses various things that I personally haven't seen before anywhere in any StarCraft thing that I had to create from scratch. And I was talking to people I know. I was like, "Hey, do you know how someone would do something like this, or have you seen this before?" And their answer was, for the most part, no.
Yeah, and similarly, I work in tech, even though my role in this project is not tech related. So I'm very cognizant of this thing seems really easy to do, and then I'm asking them to do like 300 changes. But there's been a few of that where I'm like, how can we do this tiny thing to like it'll make it fit better with the lore? And Synergy or Avalis will go, hey, this is going to take like a week. So
I'm sure even with like writing scripts or writing like the logs or any amount of text where you're like, I need this to convey a certain type. I need this to convey something in particular. And then you write it and then you write it again and then you write it again. You're like, it's really not getting what I'm trying to put down here. So I feel like every element can kind of have that same thing where you just want to make a thing. You know in your mind exactly what you want it to be, and it seems like it should be so simple. And then you spend a day on it, and then you spend 2 days on it, and then you spend a week on it. You're like, how am I still stuck on this one stupid thing? Yeah, I think everybody can sympathize with that in some way. I just feel like, especially with probably working in a real-time strategy engine editor, surely you all are hamstrung by a lot of the technical restrictions of the editor. How does it, what's it like, or I guess if anyone just has any general thoughts on still working in the StarCraft 2, the Galaxy editor, pros, cons, wish lists for, future games or engines editors on what would help you the most?
From a map making
Am I
perspective.
audible?
Oh, go ahead, Al, please.
Sorry, I was on mute before because I'm driving and handling with my cell phone is a bit of a pain since it's a bit slow. But anyhow, so let me first answer this question in particular now, and I will get back to the one you asked me. Regarding technological challenges with the game, I mean, when it comes to scope creep, I think our experience for many of the team members happens that we already have faced many of the issues with handling a lot of abilities, backend systems, things like that. And we usually try to be more conservative about it. Like, hey, this sounds like it will be really hard, if not impossible, to implement, right? Because of our experience. And then sometimes it happens that we connect the dots, like, oh, there is actually some discovery, some hacks and workaround that someone discovered, and then it's like, oh, actually, this could be used to implement this, right? For example, the autosave system is essentially that. It,
Al, you're breaking up something fierce, my friend.
We're losing him.
I'll tell you what, Jay, let's hold that thought for him. As soon as he gets to an area with clearer reception, we can go back to that.
Yeah. We'll circle back to that. Well, I guess it's kind of to the whole group, because everyone's in some way or another working in the editor, except maybe Subsorian directly. But do you all kind of have a wish list? Like, if this was something that you could have that would help save a lot of time or effort in the editor?
Probably anything related to external assets would be a lot nicer to handle. Because right now the tools that we have are like really extremely old. So even making something as, just starting a model, it's a chore into itself, and there's a lot of issues with that. So probably I would just like better tools overall for any of them.
Yeah. I've been working a little bit lately with a project called Resurgence of the Storm, which is taking Heroes of the Storm, putting it in the StarCraft 2 engine. And there's a lot of limitations. Heroes of the Storm is based, the engine of Heroes of the Storm is based on the StarCraft 2 engine, but they upgraded quite a few things. But they didn't take those upgrades and put them into the StarCraft 2 engine. So there's quite a few models from Heroes of the Storm that can't be put into StarCraft 2 directly, simply because of the model version. It's too good. They put new systems in, and it just can't handle it, and it just crashes. I wish they would have just done that, because then we would have access to those things.
Yeah, it's interesting how kind of hearing you all talk as a team through this and thinking about what you've gone through to make a project to this length of this scope. It's really interesting to think about how we talk about like, oh, it's map making, it's a hobby, right? But stuff like this, in a general sense, it's not easy, it's not cheap, and you face a lot of the same challenges that people in industry face. So we say like, oh, well, Synergy, you do this full time, but in many ways, it's the exact same as someone who's working, at their corporate job. You have old tools that aren't flexible, right? You work with a team that works from different areas, and you have to communicate with them across different time zones. You have to work cross-functionally and keep in mind what the next person down the line or the person before you was doing before you plow ahead with a new idea. A lot of these are just human challenges and experiences that everyone has at all sorts of different jobs. So I really have to hand it to the team for coming through and making something of this scope. And I really am not exaggerating. Or trying to give like too much praise or going overboard with praise. Like what you guys have accomplished in part 1 was beyond literally anything I have experienced. And I've played, again, you all know, I've played through all sorts of stuff across a bunch of different games, both on and off camera. So I'm really, really excited to see the changes to part 1, but then part 2 as well, because the talent that's brought together here and the fact that it's able to be brought together and kept together and make a product is really incredible. Again, given the types of challenges that people both in and out of industry face, being able to overcome those, it really is something to be proud of.
I think one of the reasons the team is so successful is, I mentioned earlier, you want to provide an objective, a vision, and then let the team members figure out within their own area of expertise how to get there. But there aren't silos in the same way you might have with a more conventional corporate game development infrastructure. So it's not uncommon with an actual studio where you'd have one person whose job would be to create the meshes for a model, one person or multiple doing textures, one person doing the rigging for animation, and then another person or two doing the animations themselves. So they stay in their lanes, right? That's what they do. They get the model when it's done from party A, and then they work on it, and then they hand it off down the line. This team, we don't do that. While everyone does have their areas of expertise, yes, it is not uncommon for the team members to wear multiple hats and cross over into other disciplines where the work overlaps. So as an example, we'll go ahead with Kat. I mean, Kat doesn't just do one piece of the model making. Yes, we have some external contributors who provide the base model. They feed it to him. Sometimes he can work directly with that to incorporate it into the engine. Sometimes the external party has to make modifications. Sometimes Cat makes the modifications. So it just depends. But the team's got the flexibility and freedom to choose how far they want to go down those rabbit holes with what they feel comfortable with. You know, Inoki would sort of be another one where I'll say, hey, this boss fight needs to do this. And then he'll come back and say, this looks even better. Why don't we do this instead? And he's right. It looks fantastic. So, he's got the creative liberty to take the concept and really run with it. And the whole team does. And I think that's really helped us collaborate together better than we would if everyone was so rigidly siloed into areas of discipline.
I also think another thing to mention is, so StarCraft's already kind of a small group, and like the pool of skilled mod makers too is also very small. We've all worked on projects together for years. Like even me as a lore consultant, I'm pretty sure every time I go on a major project, it's at least 3/4 of the people in this chat right now. So I think we're all very aware of each other's limitations and our skill sets. And we have a rapport even before this project. So that helps a lot too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Straight up, I've been working with Cat, with Synergy, and with Sensorian for a while. So we're not new to each other.
Well, yeah, and individually, you all have worked on things that I've played, and you've provided me hours and hours and hours of entertainment. So thank you each for that. So that's why I'm really excited to see this project as it continues. You got me really hyped up. It's clear that you've made so much progress. The train's not stopping. And what's next? Is part 2 is it part 1 and part 2? Is expected to be more? What's the plan?
So our ultimate goal, of course, is to provide a gaming experience that people enjoy. If we accomplish that, I think our work relative to this campaign is finished. We could put a fork in it. So we will have 28 missions and an unplayable epilogue as what we consider to be the finished product that will be deployed. We are deploying it to the Blizzard Arcade. There are some kludgy limitations there because the arcade itself has some limitations on size, but we figured out how to get around that, and so that's where it's going to go. We think we'll just get more eyes on it, more accessibility for people who aren't familiar with moving different things around in their folders to be able to play it. So the go ahead, we deploy it to the arcade, folks are able to interact with it, and then it's going to really depend on the community more than anything else. I mean, the game itself has been abandoned for the better part of 8 years. The last major release was almost 10 years ago. So there's a question mark as to whether this type of campaign is as desired as it may have been a decade ago. But if it is, and if it resonates really well with the community, our goal would be to crowdfund a conclusion with what happens when the UED goes back to the Kaprulu sector. And everything that we're doing in this campaign is setting the foundations for motivation. Why would the UED go there? What happened? What really happened that would cause them to take the actions that they would, story-wise, take? And we would expect that arc would span 3 episodes. The loose outline puts it at about 68 missions total, and you would have the appearance of major characters from the existing franchise as well as new characters that would come from the UED. So there's a lot of potential there, but it would really depend on whether the community wants to see something like that or not. So it'll be interesting to see when the time comes, if that is desired. If not, then we will end the campaign on the note of the epilogue, which itself will still provide a satisfying conclusion, and it will tie off all the loose threads that are present throughout the storyline.
Very nice. I know it's crazy to think about like going far. Like part 2's coming out, we got to be focused on that, and then I'm like, what's after that though? Let's jump ahead. But yeah, is it safe to say part 2 will be released this year? Is there a rough date?
Can't give a date. Our goal is this year, though. Yes.
Got it. Very nice. Does anyone else on the team have any topics that they just would love to share, just to have people hear about?
So I'd like to mention that I played UED First Light when it first came out, and then before joining part 2 as a refresher. And I was one of those players that really did not enjoy my playthrough because I'm a pretty casual player, and it takes me a while to learn new units and strategies. And I feel that some of the criticisms, I shared some of those in regards to difficulty and mission length. So I was pleasantly surprised when I learned that part 2 was going to be completely different, more StarCraft 2 in style. And I think players will find that a lot more accessible and easy to get into. Like part 2 resembles a lot the StarCraft 2 campaign missions. At least that was the instructions that I got, and that was my goal going into those. But while I was working on part 2 missions, Oracle was overhauling the part 1 maps, and I got the opportunity to playtest a bunch of those. And it's a night and day difference. They are massively improved. I actually found myself enjoying all of those remade missions. So I think any player that didn't enjoy UED First Light the first time around will definitely enjoy it now. Even the updated part 1 missions. I think this will be the changes will make it much more accessible to the players who didn't like it the first time around.
That's awesome to hear. I guess the only thing I'm not looking forward to is having to make new video thumbnails. But otherwise, yeah, I'm gonna love replaying. I'm just gonna replay it from start to finish.
Yeah, and to add on to Synergy, one aspect, I'm also a very casual. I love this. I'm someone who does RTS for the story and vibes. And I feel like one thing that got tied in a lot better is you get a lot more of a sense of the unique mechanics of the UPL as a faction, whereas in old part 1, you could get by and not really utilize them all. I feel now they're introduced a lot better, and you get a lot more of a sense of what mechanically they're all about. So, yeah, look forward to that.
Yeah, now you get a lot of use out of all the tech that that's really fun for the UPL. Whereas before there was like 1 or 2 missions where you could like use the entire arsenal. Now there's a lot more where you can just flex the entire UPL strength.
When I went through on my I played it originally when it came out, and then later, right before I joined the team, I played it again, and I just went through and I just found all sorts of data bugs, and I just made lists, and then I fixed them all. So
Hell
that was a
yeah.
fun thing to do.
A few quality of life changes in between all of that, which is some units just got a lot better now with all the changes Nuki made.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah, I think Oracle, you had posted like in the dev diaries a lot of the balance changes for like very specific changes for units. So I'm sure it'll play a lot differently. I think I saw like a big one to me was like the basic static defense structure got a pretty noticeable buff. Stuff like that, it would change how the maps are played pretty dramatically. But then to hear there seems like because a lot of the maps have been split out, a lot of dialogue's been added, it's going to be like an entirely new experience. I'll have to take the old maps and save them under like different names. I'm curious to go back and play those like the week before the new ones come out, and then that way they'll be fresh in my mind, and then I'll play the new ones and really get a sense of how much you guys have changed and improved. That'll be great. I see Alavis has been able to rejoin us. Al, do you have if we're able to get through to you, if your connection's okay, if you wanted to redress any of the earlier questions or not?
Oh no.
I think he's still in listen-only mode.
He's
fine.
gone.
I just wanted to give him the opportunity. Otherwise, he can leave comments in the video and stuff too. Well, hey, I don't want to keep anyone for too long, but again, I just want to field to the team. If y'all have anything in particular you want to share, people to hear, now's the time. And then otherwise, I'm just happy to share this with viewers and get the word out. Well, cool. I really appreciate everyone's time. Again, this is a big team, and the fact that you all were able to hop on here and chat with me is awesome. I just hope to do my part, get the word out as best I can. Like Oracle had mentioned, it's an old game. The audience is there. It's just we just getting to them, and we get eyes on the product, because this is one that really deserves it. I mean, just the amount of effort and consideration that goes into player feedback is something that is truly remarkable, that really doesn't exist. And it doesn't have to exist for something that we consider kind of a hobbyist realm. And the fact that you all are actioning it so aggressively is really something special. So I'm looking forward to playing it for sure. And yeah, thanks for stopping by.
Jay, thanks for taking the time to meet with all of us, and everyone else who's listening, thank you in advance for engaging with the content, which we hope that you will quite enjoy when it hits the airwaves. If I was to put a approximate release time frame, I would say it would be towards the middle part of December. That's my best guess. It could be sooner, but I'm thinking that aligns with our current progress.
Christmas time. Perfect.
It's a Christmas gift. There you go.
That's right. StarCraft 2 Christmas gift 2024.
Part 2 is the Christmas episode.
That's right.
That's what we were working on this whole time. It's one mission. It's just Christmas.
UED Jolly Light.
really goes against. Yeah, part 2 you said isn't going to be as miserable as part 1, and that's because it's entirely Christmas themed.
We took your feedback about the dark tones, so now it's all jolly.
Well, hey, thanks everybody. Thanks again, and hope talk soon.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everybody.